So, I've spent the last 3 days of my existence binge watching the entirety of the Venture Brothers, and not even for a particular reason. I just kind of wanted to, I guess. And zoo wee mama, it's a lot to take in. So I guess I'll just start here. The beginning. What is the Venture Brothers? The Venture Brothers was an Adult Swim show that ran kinda from 2003 to 2018, and it follows the adventures of former child star and boy adventurer Thaddeus Rusty Venture and his dealings of life post childhood stardom. The show was essentially a parody of those sci-fi Hanna-Barbera cartoons that your mom, your dad, and her boyfriend loved so much in the 60s, even though the Venture themselves are just loose interpretations of those heroes. I mean, just look at Rusty's dad himself, Jonas Venture. That's definitely Doc Savage. And there's no way, and I mean no way, that Rusty's sons, Hank and Dean Venture, aren't the Hardy Boys themselves. Not those Hardy Boys, the other ones. Keep up. I actually can't be convinced otherwise. But to say that the Venture Bros is just that, a parody of sorts, would really be shortchanging the show. If you want to know what the show is about, then look no further than its main character, Rusty Venture. Ah, Rusty Venture, Rusty Venture. Child TV star, product of nepotism, failed super scientist, and overall kind of terrible person. Imagine, if you will, that you're a child traveling from country to country, engaging in countless dangerous adventures, solving mysteries with the gang, and living under the shadow of one of the richest, smartest, and most beloved men in the world. And you're expected to follow in his footsteps, and you just don't. All of the boyhood charm and goodwill that you had has been stripped away. And the only question people have for you is what happened. What happened to you, the prodigal son? Well, that's the easy part. What did happen to Rusty Venture? He grew up. And what happens to anyone that grows up? You become disillusioned. Especially someone like Rusty, who, despite growing up, the world that he occupied as a child, filled with heroes and villains, secret plans, super spies, and shady underground organizations, did not grow up with him. And he's just so over it. But he chooses to just roll with the punches nonetheless because that's what adults do. It's just part of growing up. Despite being the only one who is in an actual cartoon, the people that surround Rusty are the ones that act like cartoons, from the super spies like his on again, off again bodyguard Brock Sampson. Essentially superhuman, unstoppable killer of men who goes on secret espionage missions where he kills all of the guys, gets all of the girls, or his arch nemesis, the Monarch, who is a villain with his own flying lair and a Monarch themed costume, henchmen, weapons, and the like. And he, like Brock Sampson, is definitely a walking cartoon, just like everyone else, really. But maybe that's the point. So if Venture Brothers is about growing up, then I guess you can say it's about growing up and leaving childish things behind. But surely the show must be about more than just that, right? Like Amran, hey, the show is called The Venture Brothers. What about them? They must suit the growing up theme, right? Well, yeah, sure. Even though I'm pretty sure the show's title is alluding to two different characters, but we'll talk about that some other time. Nonetheless, we have Hank and Dean Venture, the Hardy Boys, the 16-year-old sons of Rusty Venture, who accompany Rusty on most of Rusty's adventures, with Dean being the nerdy, book smart one, and Hank being the sillier, not as smart, but definitely more self assured brother of the two. They start off as two golly gee peachy keen teenagers, you know, the Scooby Doo types, and grow into more defined versions of themselves, which is surprising seeing how they die. And they die a lot. Despite being not that accomplished of a super scientist, Rusty was able to invent human cloning. And every time the Ventures die, he just clones them from the age that they died. Eh. And eventually all of the clones die, and Dean and Hank find out that they themselves are clones, and Dean goes through something of an identity crisis due to not really being sure how to live with this information, and everyday stuff like his father breathing down his neck to follow in his footsteps, and also just being a typical hormonal teenager with crushes, desires, and fears of his future. So much so that he has sex with his brother's girlfriend. I guess you can say being a teenager is weird. And hormones are crazy, I think. And Hank, too, is dealing with the goings on of growing up and dealing with crutches and knowing not what to do with your life. They start off as squeaky clean Scooby Doo type kids, then grow up to be the typical everyday teens, not really sure what to do with life, but still trying to figure out who they are and what's their purpose and things like that. And more or less just how to be an adult in a confusing world. But maybe that's the other important thing about growing up, according to the Venture Brothers. So, if the Venture Brothers is about growing up, then I guess you could say that it's about growing up and figuring out how to be an adult. And yeah, this is all well and good. Surely this is nice, poignant, and all other fluffy words like that. I mean, it does make a lot of sense in the grand scheme of things, but I don't think this is the message Doc Hammer and Jackson Public really want you to get. Just look at Henchman 21, my favorite character, and I think also the most well-realized character if you ask me. Henchman 21, Gary Fisher, a character so unimportant in the early part of the show that he isn't even given a name. Just a number, just a designation. Only really there to riff off of his Ray Romano sounding best friend Henchman 24 and throw out random pop culture references to add some humor and meta-ness to the show, and eventually die at the hands of Brock Sampson, just like many others in his crew. He starts off as nothing more than a low-ranking henchman in the Monarch ranks, just goofing off and talking about nerd culture, like you would expect a kid in over his head to do. But as the series progresses, his best friend is killed, and this pushes him to get into shape, become a trained fighter, and take his henchman job more seriously. But here's the thing. Here's the genius of the show. He went through one of the most traumatic things that someone can go through. One of the most heart-wrenching things that happened in the show. But guess what? He doesn't become some stoic killer or some wild soldier just oozing with charisma or anything stupid like that. No, he's still just as goofy, if not more so, and still as huge as a nerd as he ever was. He even goes into battles wearing Jedi robes and quoting Star Wars.
You to tear up that last agreement you made with the Monarch.
Whoa, really? And you are...
Just a concerned citizen, Jedi, ninjas, all.
Idiot.
You must go to the Dagobah system. There you will meet the Jedi Master who instructed me.
A good one.
You know, fly casual. He is, by all accounts, a dork. And he goes on to become the most realized version of himself that he can be without having to sacrifice who he is as a person, as an adult, despite living in a world that forces you to grow up fast and conform. And there it is, the coup de grace. The big idea. The point, as it were. Growing up isn't about leaving childish things behind you or learning how to be an adult from pre-established rules. No, maybe growing up is just whatever you want it to be. Or hell, maybe growing up is just learning how to be who you are. Maybe it really is just that damn simple. Or the Monarch. Maybe the best character in the show has something to say about this. The Monarch, the man, the myth, the rich guy in a butterfly costume, with the exception of 21, he might have experienced the most change from the beginning of the show all the way to the last. The arch nemesis of Rusty Venture, whose sole passion in life is to be the villain to Rusty's hero. Even though, yeah, calling Rusty a hero is a Professor Impossible type reach. Yeah? Uh, Anywho, all he wants to do is pursue his interest and passion. But everywhere he turns, he's bombarded with rules and regulation and various other bureaucratic red tape brought on by his employers, the Guild of Calamitous Intent. And like Rusty, he just wants to indulge in his work, his passions. However, what makes the Monarch so interesting is that he's an antithesis of Rusty Venture, while also being very similar to Rusty. See, because Rusty wants to live in a because Rusty wants to live the life of a normal, functioning adult, but is bombarded by this cartoony hero villain world, while the Monarch wants to live in that cartoony hero villain world, but all of the regulations and rules of adulthood, of just working in an environment, are forcing him to grow up. Both he and Rusty are disillusioned by growing up in the same world while still both wanting to occupy opposite ends of it. So, yeah, what does this tell us? At times, the Monarch himself questions if he even wants to be a villain. And at times, Rusty himself considers life as a villain. And it's kind of alluded to that each other's lifestyle will make them much happier than what they are now. This is just the surface of the show that we're talking about. There's hundreds of other characters that I didn't even allude to or scratch the surface of. Characters that really fit the theme of what we're talking about here, like Billy Quizboy and Pete White. I didn't even mention the Doctor Strange parody, Dr. Byron Orpheus, Sorcerer Supreme struggling with fitting into a normal life and taking care of his teenage daughter, or Dr. Girlfriend, who is a very capable villain in her own right, but still chooses to play the number two to her inferior husband, the Monarch. And eventually she becomes one of the leaders of the guild and becomes less happy with life after that. I didn't even mention Dr. Henry Killinger, but not for any particular reason. He's a parody of Henry Kissinger and Mary Poppins, and I just find that kind of funny. Here's my point. No one in the show is truly happy with what adult life has given them, yet they choose to work with what they're given. And here, my friends, is the big picture that I really believe Jackson Publix and Doc Hammer wants you to get. Adulthood is hard. It's confusing. It's really expensive. And no one knows what they're doing. Like at all. Hell, the one character who more or less did have it all figured out died. And really, yeah, we're just all winging it. Because adulthood doesn't really stop at any point. So you just, make do with what you can, I guess. I mean, someone has to. I still don't know why y'all watch my videos. I really don't. All my videos are trash. Nonetheless, if you're one of the 5 people who make it this far into the video, thank you for watching. I love y'all. Keep supporting, unless you don't want to. Goodbye.